A garden, France, January 31st, 1945. The snow has been falling since midnight. There is a wooden post in the center of the garden. Tied to it, a young man, 24 years old, an American soldier in an American uniform. He is shivering, not from cold. 12 American rifles are pointed at his chest. 12 American soldiers, his own countrymen, are staring down their sights at him. A white paper target has been pinned over his heart, directly over the pocket where he keeps his wife's photograph. He looks at the priest standing beside him, and he whispers, quietly enough that only God can hear it. They are not shooting me for deserting the United States Army. They are shooting me to make an example. His name was Eddie Slovik. He never fired a single shot in combat. He never killed a single enemy soldier. He never even tried to help the Germans. He simply walked away. And for that, the most powerful military in the world tied him to a post and shot him dead. But here is the question that has haunted American history for 80 years. 21,000 American soldiers deserted in World War II. 49 of them were sentenced to death. 49. Only one was actually executed. Why Eddie Slovik? Why a 24-year-old kid from Detroit who had never hurt anyone? Why not the rapists? Why not the murderers? Why not the officers who abandoned entire platoons? The answer to that question lives inside one decision, made by one man, sitting at a mahogany desk in Paris with a pen in his hand. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, future President of the United States. And today, we are going to sit with him in that room. We are going to watch him pick up that pen, and we are going to ask the question that nobody in power wanted asked. Was it justice, or was it murder? Before we go further, drop a number in the comments right now. Out of 21,000 deserters, how many do you think deserved the death penalty? Just type your number. We will come back to it at the end. Please like and subscribe to the channel. It only takes 1 second. To understand why Eddie Slovik died, you have to understand who he was before the war touched him. He was not a soldier. He was never going to be a soldier. He was a little guy from the wrong side of Detroit. Born in 1920 in a Polish immigrant neighborhood where you either worked in the factories or you didn't work at all. His family was poor the way that Depression-era poor actually was. Not tight-month poor, but no shoes in winter poor. Eddie grew up in that poverty, and it shaped him in the way poverty always does. It made him desperate, and desperation made him stupid. As a teenager, he stole, petty theft mostly, bread, candy, small things. Then he stole a car. The courts sent him to a reformatory, then to prison. But here is what the Army and history overlooked. Prison changed Eddie Slovik. Not completely, not perfectly, but genuinely. He learned a trade, plumbing. He worked hard. He kept his head down. And when he got out, he did something that nobody from his neighborhood did after a prison record. He became a decent man. He got a job. He met a woman named Antoinette Wisniewski. She was older than him. She had a slight disability that made other men look away. Eddie didn't look away. He fell in love with her. He married her. He bought furniture on credit because they had no savings, but he wanted her to have a real home. And in his diary, a small notebook he kept, he wrote 5 words that break your heart when you know what's coming. I am the luckiest guy in the world. He had nothing by any objective measure. A criminal record, a working-class job, a rented house in Detroit. And he thought he was the luckiest man alive. Then 1944 arrived, and the American military came for him. By mid-1944, the American military was hemorrhaging men in Europe. The campaign from Normandy through France was consuming soldiers faster than they could train them. The Army relaxed its standards. Men who had previously been disqualified for criminal records were now being drafted. Eddie Slovik's name came up. He begged. He pleaded. He told the draft board about his criminal record, about his wife, about his terror of violence. He told them he was afraid of guns. The Army did not care. They gave him a rifle, they put him on a troop ship, and they sent him to France. Here's a question for the comments, and think carefully before you answer. Should men with criminal records have been drafted at all? Did the Army create this problem by sending men who were clearly psychologically unfit for combat? Type yes or no and tell us why. Subscribe to this channel and share this story to one special person. August 1944, France. Eddie Slovik arrived as a replacement soldier in the 28th Infantry Division. You need to understand what that assignment meant. The 28th Infantry Division had a nickname among the men who knew what it meant: the Bloody Bucket. Their divisional patch was a red keystone, the symbol of Pennsylvania, but the men called it the Bloody Bucket because of what the division's casualty rates did to every soldier in it. You went in, you bled, and you kept getting replaced until there was nobody left to replace. Eddie Slovik arrived at the front in the middle of a German artillery barrage. The noise alone is something that combat veterans describe as something the human brain was simply not designed to process. It is not loud. It is a physical force that moves through your body. The ground shakes, your vision blurs, men around you disappear in flashes of smoke and fire. Eddie Slovik had never heard a gun fired in combat. He had never seen a man killed. He had never been under fire. And in his first hour at the front, he froze. He dug a hole. He climbed in. He stayed there. He didn't fire his rifle. He didn't follow orders. He simply stopped functioning as a soldier. That night, he told another replacement soldier the truth that sealed his fate. I am not cut out for this. I am going to run away. And then, he did. But here is what the history books always get wrong about Eddie Slovik. He didn't run to Germany. He didn't defect. He didn't try to surrender to the enemy. He didn't help the Germans in any way. He just walked away from the front. And he found a Canadian military police unit about 6 miles back. He told him who he was. He ate with them. He cooked for them. He helped them. He stayed with the Canadians for 6 weeks. 6 weeks in which he was, by every honest measure, a useful, cooperative, non-violent man who simply refused to go back to the place where men were being blown apart. After 6 weeks, the Canadians returned him to the U.S. Army. And here, right here, is where Eddie Slovik made the decision that killed him. Before you judge him, and you will judge him, ask yourself this honestly in the comments. If you had been in Eddie's position, no military training worth mentioning, terrified of violence, wife at home who needed you, would you have gone back to the front? Be honest. This is a safe space for honest answers. Drop your comment in the comment box, like and subscribe to this channel. When Eddie Slovik was returned to his unit, his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Ross Henbest, offered him a deal. It was a generous deal, more generous than Eddie deserved by military law. Eddie, just take your rifle, go back to your platoon. We will forget this happened. No charges, no record. Most men, virtually every single deserter in that war, would have taken that deal. You go back to the front, you survive, or you don't, but you live to fight another day. Eddie Slovik said no, because Eddie Slovik had a plan. It was not a good plan, but it made complete sense to a man who had been to prison and survived it. He thought, if I go back to the front, the Germans will kill me. But if I refuse, if I make them arrest me, they will put me in a military prison. I have survived prison before, I can do it again. I will sit in a cell, safe and warm until this war ends. Then I will go home to Antoinette. So he did something that stunned every officer who heard about it. He found a piece of paper, he sat down, and he wrote a confession. Not under duress, not because anyone asked him to. Voluntarily, deliberately, with a plan. I, Private Eddie Slovik, confess to the desertion of the United States Army. I ran away because I was afraid. I will run away again if you send me back to the front. I refuse to fight. He handed the note to an officer. He smiled. He thought he had just bought a ticket to safety. He had just signed his own death warrant. The legal officer, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Sommer, read the letter and immediately called Eddie into his office. He tried, genuinely tried to save him. Son, do you understand what this paper means? This is a court-martial offense. It could mean death. Eddie nodded calmly. I know, but you won't shoot me. You never shoot deserters. You just put them in jail. And he was right. The United States Army had not executed a deserter since 1865, the year the Civil War ended. 80 years of precedent. Eddie was betting his life on 80 years of mercy. He lost that bet, but not yet. First, he had to go through the system. Drop your verdict in the comments right now before you hear what happens next. Was Eddie Slovik brave for refusing to fight, or was he a coward for abandoning his fellow soldiers? Type brave or coward and defend your answer in one sentence. We are reading every single one. You are halfway through one of the most disturbing true stories in American military history, and the worst part hasn't even happened yet. If you are watching this and you have not subscribed, do it right now. Not for us, for Eddie. Because this story exists, this channel exists, because men like Eddie Slovik deserve better than a numbered grave with no name on it. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be argued about. They deserve to have millions of people ask the question, was this right? Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and make sure you never miss a story like this one again. The algorithm will bury this video unless you help it. A like takes 1 second, and that 1 second is the only monument most of these men will ever get. November 11th, 1944. The court-martial of Eddie Slovik. It was not a long trial. It did not need to be. Eddie had confessed in writing. in his own hand, signed with his own name, and he had told his commanding officer on the record that he would do it again. 9 officers sat as judges. The prosecutor stood up. He read Eddie's letter aloud, every word of it, in a room full of men who had seen friends die in the snow. The defense had nothing, because Eddie had given them nothing to work with. He didn't testify, he didn't try to explain. He stood there, calm and quiet, convinced that the outcome was already determined, that they would give him 20 years in prison and he would sit it out. The judges deliberated. It took less time than it takes to eat a meal. The president of the court stood up. "Private Eddie Slovik, the court finds you guilty of desertion. We sentence you to be dishonorably discharged and to be shot to death with musketry." Eddie flinched, just slightly. Then he steadied himself, because he still believed in the 80 years of mercy. He told the other prisoners that night, "They just say death to scare the others. The general will reduce it to jail time. They always do." He was still confident, still certain. He went to sleep in his cell that night and dreamed, probably, of Antoinette. And while Eddie slept, secure in his gamble, history was about to destroy him. Here is a question that military law scholars still debate. The 9 officers who sentenced Eddie to death, were they following the law correctly, or were they making an example of convenience? Could they have given him prison time? They could. They chose not to. Who do you hold responsible? The judges, the system, or Eisenhower? Answer in the comments. December 16th, 1944. While Eddie Slovik sat in his cell, waiting for his sentence to be quietly reduced to prison time, Adolf Hitler launched the largest German offensive on the Western Front since D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge. 250,000 German soldiers, 600 tanks, a massive armored fist punching through the frozen Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg, catching the American lines completely off guard. The casualties were catastrophic. The first 3 days alone produced more American dead than any comparable period since the landings at Normandy. Entire units were surrounded, communication lines were cut, soldiers were freezing to death in foxholes. And across the American lines, men were running. Panic spread through the ranks in a way that hadn't been seen since the dark days of 1942. Soldiers abandoned their posts, soldiers stole military vehicles, soldiers disappeared into the French countryside and tried to make it to Paris, where a thriving black market in military fuel and equipment was doing a brisk business. General Dwight Eisenhower sat in Supreme Headquarters in Paris, and he was furious. He received a report on desertions. The numbers were staggering. Since D-Day, 6 months, 40,000 American soldiers had deserted. 40,000. That was the equivalent of 3 full combat divisions gone. Eisenhower needed the bleeding to stop. He needed to send the entire army a message that could not be misunderstood. He needed to say, desertion is not a free ticket home. Desertion is death. And then Eddie Slovik's file landed on his desk. He looked at it. A man who had confessed voluntarily. A man who had said explicitly in writing that he would desert again. A man with a criminal record who had been given chance after chance and refused every one. Eisenhower wasn't looking at a person. He was looking at a message. He thought about the men dying at Bastogne, standing in the snow, frostbitten, outnumbered, refusing to break. Colonel McAuliffe answering the German surrender demand with a single word: nuts. Why should those men, brave men, faithful men, die in the cold while Eddie Slovik sat in a warm cell? Eisenhower picked up his pen. He did not hesitate. He signed. Sentence confirmed. Eddie Slovik was the wrong man, in the wrong place, in the wrong moment in history. If he had deserted a month earlier, before the Bulge, he would have lived. If the Germans had waited another month to attack, he would have lived. If his file had landed on a different desk, he would have lived. But history does not deal in almost. Here is the hardest question in this entire story, and we need your honest answer. Was Eisenhower right? Not morally, not emotionally, strategically. Did executing one man actually save lives by deterring other desertions? Historians are divided. What do you think? Comment, Eisenhower was right, or Eisenhower was wrong, and make your case. January 30th, 1945. The news reached Eddie in his cell. A guard came to his door. He read from a paper, flat and official. The Supreme Commander has reviewed your case and confirmed your sentence. You will be executed tomorrow morning. Eddie collapsed. Not dramatically, not with a scream. He simply folded. His legs gave out. His body understood what his mind refused to process. He sat on the floor of his cell and he wept. No, they can't shoot me. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't rape anyone. I just ran away. A Catholic priest, Father Carl Cummings, came to stay with him. They spent the entire night together in that cold cell. Eddie talked about Antoinette. He talked about their apartment in Detroit. He talked about the furniture they had bought on credit, piece by piece, because they couldn't afford to buy it outright. He talked about coming home after the war and starting over. Father Cummings gave him a glass of whiskey to calm his nerves. Eddie drank it slowly, and then he said something that made Father Cummings go quiet. They're shooting me because I have a criminal record. If I had come from a good family, if I had been a nice boy from a farm, they wouldn't do this. I am being used as an example. He was right. The historical record supports him. Men with worse records were given prison sentences. Officers who abandoned their men were quietly transferred. Eddie Slovik, poor, working class, a criminal record before the war, was selected to be the example, precisely because he had no one powerful enough to fight for him. He was the sacrificial lamb, and he knew it. This is the question that matters most, and we want every person watching to answer it in the comments. If Eddie Slovik had been the son of a senator, if he had been college educated, if he had been wealthy, do you believe he would still have been executed? Type "still executed" or "class saved him," because class privilege in military justice is a conversation America has never finished. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. The story of Eddie is about to get messier. January 31st, 1945. Morning. The MPs came for him just after dawn. Before they took him out, they cut the buttons off his uniform. This was the ritual of military dishonor, a formal stripping of belonging. You are no longer one of us. You leave this army the way you lived in it. Incomplete. They marched him through the villa to a walled garden at the back. The garden was enclosed by high stone walls. There were no windows overlooking it from the street. The army did not want photographs. They did not want witnesses. They wanted this done quietly. 400 men had been assembled nearby, close enough to hear, not close enough to see. Because Eisenhower wanted the army to know this happened. He just didn't want them to watch. The 12 riflemen were standing in a line. They were from the 109th Infantry Regiment. Trained marksmen. And every single one of them looked pale. They had not signed up to shoot Americans. The soldiers tied Eddie to the post. A leather belt was wrapped around his knees so that his body wouldn't slump when he lost consciousness. The regimental doctor walked forward. He pinned a white paper target over Eddie's heart, directly over the left breast pocket, directly over the photograph of Antoinette. Father Cummings stepped close. God have mercy on your soul, Eddie. Eddie looked at the rifles. He looked at the men holding them. He looked at the priest. Okay, Father, I am ready. The black hood was pulled over his head. Major Casas gave the order. Ready? Aim. Fire. 11 bullets struck Eddie Slovik. One soldier had been given a blank round, Army protocol, so that no man would know for certain that he had killed another American. One soldier had intentionally aimed wide. He could not bring himself to do it. The smoke cleared. The doctor walked forward. He pressed his stethoscope to Eddie's chest, and he looked up, pale, shaking, with an expression that stopped every man in that garden. He is not dead. 11 bullets. And Eddie Slovik's heart was still beating. He was choking on his own blood. He was unconscious, but he was alive. The commander panicked. Reload, reload. The firing squad fumbled with their rifles. Their hands were shaking so badly they could barely get the clips into the receivers. Then the doctor spoke again, quietly. Never mind. It is stopping. Eddie Slovik's heart faded. And then, silence. He was dead. the only American soldier executed for desertion since 1865. He was 24 years old. The army buried Eddie Slovik in a secret military cemetery in France. It was a cemetery specifically designated for men convicted of murder, rape, and the most serious crimes. He was buried there, among them. They put a number on his grave, not a name. Plot E, grave 65. And then the army did something that is, even by the brutal standards of wartime military justice, extraordinarily cruel. They did not tell his wife the truth. Antoinette Slovik received a telegram, standard military language, cold and official. Private Eddie Slovik died in the European theater. That was it. No explanation, no details. Antoinette assumed her husband had died in battle. She thought he was a hero. She applied for his $10,000 military life insurance. The army denied it. He died under dishonorable circumstances. She spent years fighting to find out how her husband actually died. When she finally learned the truth that he had been tied to a post and shot by his own army, she was broken. She pleaded with Eisenhower directly, letters, petitions, begging, "Please bring his body home, let me bury him beside me." Eisenhower refused. Multiple presidents refused. The army wanted Eddie Slovik forgotten. Antoinette died in 1979. She never saw her husband's grave. She never got to stand over him and say goodbye. It wasn't until 1987, 42 years after the execution, that President Ronald Reagan finally authorized the return of Eddie's remains. Eddie was brought back to Detroit. He was buried beside Antoinette, in the same cemetery, in the same row. Finally at peace. Finally together. 42 years too late. We need to hear from you on this. The way Antoinette was treated, denied the truth, denied the insurance, denied the body. Is that a separate injustice from Eddie's execution? Should the army have owed her the truth from day one? And does America owe the Slovik family an official apology even now? Comment your answer. Like and subscribe so the algorithm doesn't bury this. It only takes 1 second. The execution of Eddie Slovik is one of the most debated decisions in American military history. The arguments for Eisenhower are not insane. He was managing an army of 3 million men in the most violent campaign in the history of human warfare. Discipline was collapsing, men were running, the Germans were counterattacking with everything they had left. The argument that one execution, one clear, unmistakable message might save thousands of lives is not a stupid argument. But here is what the historical record actually shows. Desertion did not stop. After Eddie Slovik was shot, American soldiers continued to desert at roughly the same rate. The execution did not deter, it did not save lives, it did not turn the tide, it only killed Eddie Slovik. Most historians who have studied this case in depth have come to the same conclusion. Eisenhower was a great commander, perhaps the greatest coalition military commander in the history of warfare. But in this moment, this one moment, he chose statistics over humanity. He chose to make a point rather than show mercy, and the point didn't even work. Eddie Slovik wasn't a hero. He never claimed to be. He admitted freely that he was a coward. But he was not a monster. He was a frightened man who made a catastrophically poor calculation. He thought the system would protect him. The system used him instead. And his last words, reported by Father Cummings, deserve to be the last words of this story. "They are shooting me for the bread I stole when I was 12 years old." Now you have the full story. Every fact, every decision, every moment. And the question that began this video still stands. Was it justice or was it murder? Tell us your verdict in the comments. We read every single one. Eddie Slovik has a numbered grave. For 40 years it had no name on it. Antoinette Slovik died never standing over her husband's grave. The army got exactly what it wanted. Eddie forgotten, Eddie erased, Eddie reduced to a number in a field in France. You just watched this entire video. That means you now carry this story. And here is the brutal truth. If you close this video without doing 3 things, the algorithm will bury it, and Eddie Slovik will go back to being forgotten. That is exactly what the army wanted in 1945. Do not let them win in 2025. Hit like right now before you do anything else. Leave a comment, your verdict, justice or murder, 1 word, that's all it takes. Share this video with one person, just one person who deserves to know this story exists. And subscribe with the bell on, because we publish stories like this every week. Stories that textbooks skipped, stories that deserve millions of eyes, stories of men whose names should never have been forgotten. Eddie Slovik's last request was to go home. It took America 42 years to grant it. Don't make this story wait another 42 years to be seen. Hit the button right now. Next video. The German who saw D-Day first. Subscribe. A new story every week. Stories that deserve to be told. Comment, justice or murder? What's your verdict on Eddie Slovik?